days away from Christmas, and so our special holiday gift for you tonight are two fantastic gentlemen. I have Richard Morant from Oklahoma on my left in the middle of your screen. And then we have joining us tonight Michael Wigton on the very far left. Your left to your screen. And Michael, you're in Utah tonight. Is that not right?
That is correct. Yep, coming from
Yes,
Utah.
coming from Utah, where he tells me it's going to snow for the next couple of days. So we're excited for that. If you don't know Michael's work, Michael is a pillar in the industry, in the metaverse and NFT industry, and he has two very exciting projects going on. First is Taffy, which is a company that produces avatars that speak to the modern generation and the world forward. Beautifully done, beautifully rendered, exciting. Um, Avatars that have a lot of story and literature to them, are very literate when you look at them. And then he also has a project that he recently launched and will be going through a public launch on the 27th of this month, and that is called Non Fungible People. And I've been very blessed and grateful to be able to see a little bit of that project at its early stage. We're really looking forward to see what kind of special events and reveals we're going to have coming up in the near future. So I'd like everybody to watch for that. I am Shauna Lee Lang, and this is Metaverse News Network. And the topic of tonight is on avatars, identification with our avatars, future of the avatar. What's the rendering process like for the avatar? What kind of business decisions need to be made when we're producing avatars? And a whole host of other questions. We hope you'll join us. And with that, Richard, I'm going to hand the evening over to you as our trusted host. And I know you've got some pretty critical questions lined up from Michael, which I know he'll handle beautifully.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this one. Michael, first of all, thank you for joining us. It's absolutely incredible to have someone with your prestige and your history in this field to talk about these subjects with us. So first of all, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having us. I'm really excited to be here as well. So thank you.
It's a pleasure. So first of all, you yourself personally, how long have you been involved in the industries that touch base or touch into the metaverse?
Sure. So it's interesting. I've been everything from a teacher I've worked in manufacturing and in licensing, and so all of it kind of ties together. But I've been with Daz Taffy, and I can kind of explain that for probably about a year and a half now. And prior to that, I worked in the print-on-demand space in the physical, the physical world, and now I'm kind of in the digital space. So really got into this through the licensing aspect. I came into Daz Taffy, and we were looking at doing some interesting things with some larger brands I had some relationships with, and we brought them in and did some things with avatars and digital wearables with Coca-Cola and Care Bears, Warner Brothers, Champion. And that's kind of how I got involved in the metaverse. And I mean, it's been like, well, it's funny because I've been a year and a half, seems like 20 years in the metaverse time, right? So it's kind of
literally with the developments that have happened, you're not far wrong with that, with how fast it's all moving.
Yeah,
so with that,
it's light speed.
So what does Taffy actually do then? Can you elaborate on that a little bit for us, please?
Sure. So Taffy is part of a company called Daz 3D that was started 20 years ago, and they started in 3D art, and a lot of 3D artists use and we have a large community of artists that design 3D art that can be used in video games. It can be used in other art pieces and things. And Taffy kind of sprung off about 5 or 6 years ago as a subsidiary. And what Taffy does is create avatars. And one of the things we and we have an SDK that you can use in different applications. And then we also partner with Samsung on their AR emoji system to help with their characters created the digital wearable section. So all the branded on section in the Samsung native app, we manage that piece of it for them. We're really good with microtransactions. We've done we've been selling digital assets for like almost 20 years now. So we help Samsung with that piece of it, and then bringing some of the larger brands into that space, as mentioned before.
So for you then, I mean, you've been selling digital assets by the sound of it for what, 20 years in the space?
Correct. Yeah, and that's where yes, absolutely. And one of the things that we were joking about is like we've kind of waited, and the metaverse kind of showed up here, and now we're here, right? And now we have these digital assets that have a really true application. And in the past, we had been involved with blockchain, 6-7 years ago. At the beginning, a lot of our people were trying to figure this out and what we wanted to do, and then NFTs kind of sprung up and really kind of pushed us into that. And one of our partners, Champion, came to us and said, we'd like to do NFTs. And we're like, well, yeah, let's do that. And we kind of got into that. And that was back in probably the beginning of, the very beginning of the year, January. And everything kind of hit the ground, like it exploded. I think it was April, which again seems like 5 years ago, right? With the way things are going. And we launched with Taffy, we launched a bunch of NFTs. We worked with a company called The Digitals, and they have a Shudu, is an international digital model. She's been on the cover of Vogue magazine. We do a lot of work with them. And then we did some Champions, and then we did the big Coca-Cola launch in July for Friendship Day. We worked with Decentraland, and that was one of the things that we were really proud of because they did a really good job of coming out and and being authentic in their approach to the space. Yeah. And then since then we slowly we got into, we launched as Sean had mentioned, getting our own collection. We just launched. Pre-sale was 2 days ago. It seems like 2 weeks ago. And then the whole time continuum thing is messed up. And then we'll have the public sale on the 27th. So.
Well, first of all, congratulations. That's an incredible ride to be on with a group and the amount of numbers that I suspect that you're going to be playing with sounds incredibly interesting.
Yeah, it's been a while. And the other part, I failed to mention, there was a launch by Artifact, their Clone X project. We did a lot of the utility with them. We partner with them. They're also they have some people in Utah that we work with. And they were just purchased by Nike about a week and a half ago.
Wow.
So that's been really exciting. So we have a lot of connections with the Clone X project as well. And a lot of the utility function in that project we're applying to the one that we're going to be launching right now. So,
well, it sounds like the marketplace for avatars is bigger than we actually know about. What do you see as the marketplace for avatars, and where do you see them having function?
Yeah, that's funny you should mention that. If you've been on LinkedIn in the last, 6 months, you see more and more monkeys showing up all over the place, right? These are professional people, and I know that I'm in that space, so it's probably even skewed more. But I think people are representing themselves digitally differently than in the past. In the past, basically, they could, it was more of like, hey, I'll take a picture of myself, and that's who I am. And now the whole concept of identity has changed a little bit, and I think I look at it not only in your profile picture, but also inside of games where we look at adding that utility so people can take a two-dimensional profile picture and then put it on, turn it into a 3D avatar and go into a game with it and buy digital wearables or swords or whatever they want to buy and take that with them each place. So I think that's really going to change how we represent ourselves in the digital space.
So the other places is if we're looking at that as the market, where do you see it growing into?
I think there's a couple of places. One is obviously video games, and that's a pretty straightforward one. The other one is music, and I think music is really interesting because it's kind of that crossover with avatars, and we have several avatars. We work with one called Ruby in Asia, and she is strictly a digital artist. Nobody knows, they don't. And there was a band, what was it? The Gorillas back in the day. Have you heard of the Gorillas? They were an animated music group that you could be sitting next to one of the band members and never know it because they always represented themselves with an animated
Digitally.
character. And I think more and more people do that in the music space as well. And you've seen the Masked Singer, and you see these things where the physical, people are tied less and less to physical. And I think a lot of that had to do, was accelerated through COVID. People representing themselves more digitally than ever, and they're not spending as much time together. And it kind of and I think that musicians are really interesting. At the New York conference, he was talking about musicians and how it's changing. The whole concept of NFTs are changing the ownership structure too with that. And in the past, if I was a musician, which I'm not, I played a trumpet in second grade, so that was the peak of my musical career. But if you're a musician and you're struggling and you're playing in small bars and trying to struggle to get by, and a big record company hears you and they're like, "Hey, listen, we're going to give you $3 million, and here, sign this contract." They'd be, "Wow, I've made it. I made $3 million," until 2 or 3 years later when they're making 200 times that, and they're getting 20% of that. And now musicians can go and like, not only with the avatars and like the digital representation, but taking a music song and saying, "Hey, listen, I'm going to own 80% of this. I'll sell the other 20% as an NFT, and every time it's played in royalties, you'll get a percentage of that 20%. And me as the artist gets paid." And I think you're starting to see that more and more with artists as well, where people are willing to pay for the creators are kind of taking over in some respect, in a good way, I think.
I wouldn't say taking over, but actually being given the power to govern their own pathway rather than have it laid out for them, which is at the moment it does seem to be an industry standard of not just music, but artists in general and creatives in general haven't been able to govern their own value. And I think that is what the NFT breakout is allowing is for artists to actually go, hold on. Creativity is actually a scarcity, and being a creative is not the norm. So rather than abuse, and I use the term radically loosely, these creatives and just have so many industries built on the back of them, that we actually start being able to allow them to feel their worth. Because the days of the starving artist need to come to an end. You mean the fact that it's even such an urban myth that artists have to starve? That shouldn't be true. And now we have this opportunity to give them the power and the tools to govern their own pathways. And I think things like what you're doing are fascinating because you're allowing more people access to these kind of spaces.
Well, and it's interesting. There's also a divergence between what some would call a traditional artist that can pick up a paintbrush and a digital artist. And I think it's really interesting. That's kind of, people are starting to appreciate the digital artist more. And you see that with the NFTs that they're selling. And we have an artist, the senator, is named Senator Greaves on OpenSea. And he's made a fair amount of money in the last 2 months just by selling his digital work. And people start collecting it, and they really appreciate it. And it was interesting. I was at Art Basel in Miami, and I was walking around the traditional art space, and I saw some, Andy Warhols for $5 million, and there's a lot of really interesting stuff. And it took me till about the fourth gallery or to talk with, when I would ask each one, like, "What do you think of NFTs?" And everybody would roll their eyes and they go, "Oh, it's horrible." Ugh. And I was like, "What?" I didn't get it. Well, the reason being is a lot of those people that were art curators, they were the people that were telling me what was good art and what I should pay for it. And they were taking a large percentage, not the artist. And I went to another, there's one on the beach called Scope, which is kind of an ancillary one, part of Art Basel. And there was an artist there that I met who's a mixed media artist. And I asked him, I said, "What do you think about NFTs?" He's like, "I love it." He said, "Every art piece I make it as an NFT, and I videotape myself making it. So when people buy it, I give them the thing to hang on their wall, and they get a video of me making the art. So they're part of the creative process." And he said, "I have picked up more." Or it was just a piece of art that somebody could have made, and it was, it wasn't a big deal. But now you're getting these relationships between people that appreciate the art and the artist itself, which that wouldn't have existed without NFTs, in my opinion.
And you've just picked up there for me the biggest value to art. It's not the art, it's the connection to the artist. And the more people and the more actual artists start to realize that as well, the greater their marketing will become, because it's not just about the quality of the pieces of art, it's about the connection to the artist that starts lending value.
Absolutely. And I think that's where you start. And it was interesting. I had a conversation with one of my nephews about, like, he asked me if I thought like there was an objective truth with art. And I said, no, I don't know that there is. And we had a little bit of a disagreement about that, but what I find amazing and really interesting, someone else might not. And I think that's that's part of the beauty of art, right? You can see something and it looks different to you as it does to me. And I have my own style, and there's room for all these different people. And that's where I think the creative power of the masses becomes, super powerful. And you get these groups of people that, like, hey, this is good art. But now with more access to art, I don't have to just take their word for it. I can go explore a lot more art that I was able to do that in the past. So,
and the other part that we were talking about before with this is identity, and then the kind of a subsection from identity is age. And what we're kind of talking about here as well is accessibility to different age groups and different ways of thinking to different formats of art. Because I know the elder group of people still want that painting that hangs on a wall. But if you talk to a 16-year-old or to a 24-year-old that has just come out of university, been on Robinhood for a while, now has a little bit idea what trade, what these kind of things are. They don't have access to other forms of, what do you want to call it? Investment, trade, ways of passive income to be accessible at that age. And put that dynamic over the top of what's happening, and I think you get a really interesting look at where is the purchasing power.
Oh yeah, and I think it skews younger every day. And I've got 3 boys under 18 that would, if you look into my credit card bill, would tell you the exact same thing, right? They have the power to, regardless, they figured out how to get into the credit card, how to set it up on their game console, and they buy digital goods all the time. And I think that's where younger kids are they're buying more digital things than ever before, because their world is different. Like, I think when I was growing up, we accumulated stuff, and we had shoe boxes full of stuff with baseball cards or stamps, and we collected different things. And these guys when they go online, whatever their stuff online, that gives them an identity that they identify with their friends. And the worst thing in the world that you can call somebody is a noob, right? You're a newbie. Like you're like, if I go on and I played a couple, I'm not good at the games. I was good at the games a long time ago, but the games that they play, I go in and I play, and they know I'm not good because I don't play it all the time. And I don't look like I'm a player because I have the default, right? I have the one that they get for free, and the kids are buying digital clothes to let everybody else know, like, hey, I'm not, I belong here. I'm somebody who has status.
Look, I mean, social signaling is going to be present no matter where the community. You have a community of people, there's going to be social signaling, whether it's meerkats in the African bush or in the African savannah, or school kids in Canada. That social signaling is going to happen when you get a gathering of people.
Right. Yep. Yeah.
So no matter what,
yeah, no, and now you can do it digitally. Absolutely. And through your digital identity. And I think the other thing that we were talking about, which is interesting, is I think the digital identity at a younger age is much more fluid than an older person, in my opinion. Whereas I look at something, and the first avatar I remember making was, I think, on the Wii, and we had the Wii characters with the gigantic heads, and we would play. It was fun. You would try to make an avatar that looked just like somebody in your family, and then you would name them, and that was a big deal. You were. And now with all these games and things, people go in and they can switch from a warrior princess to an ogre king to a zombie, and it doesn't matter what the gender is a lot less important to them, whereas for older people in general.
So now, the one of the things that constantly fascinates me about this is exposing kids to external worlds and external possibilities at such a young age, and how are we now able to protect our children from losing themselves in this digital world and making sure that they're staying centered in the real world. How do you see, I mean, because you're right on the cutting edge of this, where you're dealing with people's representations in the digital world. Where do you see this tracking out as and the dangers involved in this?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think about it a lot, and I think that it's yeah, we don't know, right? We're still figuring that out. And I know that we have a 17-year-old and a 15-year-old, and when the iPad came out, we thought, wow, this is great. Now he'll, all the stuff that we read now is things we probably did that we shouldn't have done, right? Like, here's an iPad, and and it was interesting. I'm on a school board, and the interesting thing that the principal noticed, that she said when kids came in, and this was probably like 7-8 years ago, younger kids in kindergarten were going up to the computer screen and we're doing this, right? They were trying to move like an iPad, and she's like, they didn't know what a mouse was. They'd never used a mouse, but they all use iPads. And so they were trying to, like, that's how they've been conditioned. And I think one of the things that we do as a parents, and I don't know whether it's good or not, but we are very close about limiting time, right? We take the power cord away. They don't have the power cord, they can't play. And I think it also, one of the things that my kids have hopefully figured out too is, I think nature is even more important today. Like with you sit in front of a computer screen. I know for me, I'm talking to people on the phone, and at the end of the day, I throw my phone. I want to go do something outside. I want to do that. So I think that's going to be a big push, and I think that'll be. I think it's going to be really important that we do more of that. I don't know. It's going to be interesting though. But I will say too, I think I notice in certain people in the real world, it's harder for them than, and even with my own kids, I would walk to a restaurant, I make them not like, hey, I'm not ordering for you. You do that. Let's interact with people. And I remember back in the day, I was a teacher, and I think my whole family went on vacation, and for some reason I didn't go with them. And I was all alone, and I made it to 5 o'clock that day, and I hadn't spoken to another individual. So I went to get my hair cut so I could talk to somebody, right? Like, I just, like, you kind of crave that interaction with people. And I think that one of the things that the digital run is it's allowed us to communicate more with people, but not connect maybe as much. And one of the things I noticed in the New York NFT, how excited people were who had never met in person, but had formed these relationships digitally, going together physically was even better. I felt like it was like people found a long lost member, and it was really powerful. And that restored my faith in humanity. I'm like, okay, we're all going to end up in metal cans and Oculus and not talking to each other, right? People still crave that, and I truly believe that. And I think that will be. I think we can have both. We can have a great connection, a great communication online, but the connection still has to be somewhat physical in the end. So, and maybe I'll be right. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know, but we'll see.
Oh no, I completely agree with you that physical is still where it's going to be at, because I mean, you look at how bad everyone craved it at the end of isolation. Like, even getting a hug, even getting from a hug from someone that wasn't in your like immediate circle was like is this do we do this? Are we doing this? Are we really And it was so weird, and we realized how much we actually crave that personal interaction, and it is how that absence of it has been a necessity, and to realize the good of it when we get it together.
I've never loved going to the grocery store as much as I do now. It was I go to the grocery. Oh, great. I see people. Yeah, it's tough. And I think it's interesting is I read an article where in 2007, a lot of the bigger companies like Google and Yahoo, we had the technology to do what we're doing now, to do a lot of virtual meetings, but they all built these big campuses to encourage everybody to come to the office, and they did everything from your laundry to free food, and they really wanted to. And I think the head of Yahoo at the time, she wanted people to. She put out a memo like, "No, we want you in the office as much as we can," and as it started going, COVID really pushed it the other direction, and we found out there are certain things we can do just fine, like our software coding, where we don't all need to go to the same office, put headphones on and block out lights and like sit next to each other. We're not gaining a whole lot. But then on the other hand, there are people like, Richard, you and I are talking, sales and marketing, business development people. Innovation happens together. And I think digitally, it's still not quite there. And when I get in a meeting with 10 people and everybody's microphone is muted, it's really difficult. It's hard to, you don't have the meeting after the meeting or the sidebar conversations. One person talks and 9 people listen. And that's really, I think that's not a great way to drive innovation. So, and I have another friend that I talked to, he'd have a little bit of a lag with innovation because of that. And maybe we will, I don't know. It's going to be hard, but we've kind of missed out on some of that physical real world interaction that is not quite replaced yet in the digital space. And I don't know if you guys have tried the Facebook office with the avatars. It wasn't, I don't know. It was a little bit, it had a few things left to be desired, in my opinion.
So I would have put 2 pins in this place. First one, we're going to come back to Facebook.
Perfect.
The second one, a little bit more interestingly, we talk about how this kind of separation away from the office has affected us on an adult side. I mean, you have 3 sons that have now gone through this gap in how schooling is now having to take a relook at what it does and so on. How do you see the metaverse helping that? A, and then B, do you feel after the year that we've kind of had with them having to do this virtual schooling and how this pathway has been into this idea of virtual schooling that they're missing anything?
Yeah, it's interesting. The one thing my youngest let me know is when it dawned on him one day that we would never have snow days again, ever. Right? The virtual schooling, he's like, oh, we'll never be able to have a school day or a snow day again. One of the things I think the metaverse in general, I think it's going to be great. I think so. There's synchronous and asynchronous learning, right? I used to be a teacher, and we talk about things that are like where all the kids are doing something together, and then other ones are just you go and finish your assignment and turn it in when you can. So there's certain value in learning together, and you learn from each other. And I think group learning is incredibly important. You have kids that pull other kids along, and not only the kids that are learning from other kids, but the kids that are helping teach that helps them learn it as well. So I think the virtual learning lacks that hugely in a huge way, and you miss a lot of that component, the social interaction, not to mention social skills and everything else. I think the metaverse will be a step up from what the virtual learning was. As we continue to progress, virtual learning right now is watching a TV screen for the most part, in my experience. I'm on the school board, and a lot of it was just a teacher talking and kids listening, and it's difficult again to have action with 28 kids in a chat
no
room
feedback.
and correct. There's no exactly, and you're exactly. So that's been hard. I think if you can get that into the metaverse where people can go in and interact a little bit more, that's a step up. It still is not quite where the real world is, but I think that the impact is going to be. I noticed with my kids after we kind of came out with it. I know we're still in it, and I mean, but when things they had masks and they figured out how to adapt. And one of the things, they were hyper social after that. They were very, they missed a lot of that time. And just, there were times when my high school kids would be like, I got to go hang out with my friends. I'm like, where are you going? I don't know. And a lot of that, you remember back when you were in high school, that's kind of what you do, right? You want to be with friends, and to take that away at that time, that's tough. And we don't know. I mean, like, we joke that we hope they all turn out okay. And I do. But I think the part of it's going to be interesting is the virtual learning. I think there's a hybrid. I think it's great for people that in the past didn't have anything, right? Like, I think that's definitely a step up. Does it replace real world? No. Will what it's going to be better than virtual today? Absolutely. And I think the other part of it is I again, going back to my teaching background, when I was growing up, I was good at school because I was really good at regurgitating information. I could
Mm-hmm.
memorize things and spit it back, and it was a game, right? Kids
Mm-hmm.
today, like they have all the information they want in their pocket. They don't need to memorize the when the Battle of Hastings was. They can go, hey Siri, when was the Battle of Hastings? So the I think a lot of education we have is a little bit outdated as well. We have a lot
Mm-hmm.
of stuff. That's where I think the interactive experiences that we talked about before, about being able to take a field trip and go to the Louvre, real
Mm-hmm.
world. That's wow, right? You're not gonna. If I'm a kid living in middle America, I'm not gonna hop on a plane and fly to Paris. But
Mm-hmm.
if as a classroom we can go tour Sony, that's awesome. That's amazing, and it's much better than it's not looking at a screen. It's going and interacting, and you've seen, and maybe you have the new gloves, the what are they called, the
haptic gloves, yeah.
about where you wait on. Yes, I mean that's wow, right? It's going to be amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's a lot of things to come. It's going to be. I'll be old. So.
Yeah, I'll add in there too that Gary Vee would absolutely agree with you. In fact, he says that all memorization routines in the school system and educational system altogether should be completely eliminated. That there's no need for children to retain these facts by rote, which they can just go to Siri or Alexa or whomever and get at the
Right.
spin of a tip. Let me just ask you a couple quick questions, if I can, to throw in some things, interesting things that you've said. In terms of the school board itself, are you hearing anything coming out of the educators relative to the metaverse and NFTs, or is it more the adaptation of tools that include AR and VR?
Yeah, I
Do
think
you
it's
think
probably
that?
the latter. Unfortunately, I think.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's still relatively new. I think there's some really interesting things to do, even with fundraising and NFTs, where like you could do some really cool things. And one of the ones that I learned a lot from is the Decrypt app. They set up a basically it was an engagement tool for them, where every day that you would go, and I think that's done now, but you would go and you points if you read an article, or you tokens. I'm sorry, tokens. You get 3 tokens if you read an article, 2 tokens if you reacted to it, and then 3 tokens for reading, for sharing it, reacting, and reading were the 3. And you could get up to 20 tokens a day. So every day, and this was great. This was back when I was learning all about the internet, the metaverse and NFTs, and then what they allowed you to do is and they provide it too. And
Mm-hmm.
when you talk about education, where I think you're going to hook kids, gaming is where it's going to be, and gaming as education. Like, oh, listen, like I'm on level 40 because I did all these different things. That's more powerful. And talk about positive peer pressure and status. Like, oh, hey, like I just figured out all this math by doing these, whatever I did, and now I'm at level 40 and I have like extra tokens. Get whatever, and maybe we let kids buy hoodies, sweatshirts, or I don't know, like a
Mm.
lot of different ways that we can creatively help kids learn that are not being done today. But I think it's going to be, you're going to see a lot of stuff where I always like going to trade shows and conferences, and I always like to hang out in
Mm-hmm.
the far reach, the way outside, really cheap seats, because that's where all the weird, crazy stuff is. All the stuff in the middle are the big corporate guys that paid a lot of money. They're going to copy somebody else. They're not going to come up with anything. All the innovation happens with the weirdos on the edge, and I love that space. And I think those people are the ones that are going to find ways to gamify education and come up with ways of like creating metaverse opportunities where they're going to go into a certain place and have an educational event, and people are going to clamor to get in, and that's going to be exciting. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
They're still
And Coin
formulating.
and Coinbase does the same type of thing. Online educational
Well,
points for learning as you're trying to, um, conquer crypto and blockchain. You mentioned earlier too, and I don't mean to take your steam out of your horse there, Richard.
no,
No,
That
go, please.
you went to NYC NFT, and you also went to Miami Basel. And you just
Hmm.
shared that you like to hang out on the periphery because that's where all the action is.
Yeah.
Can you share with us
Right.
what
Yeah.
you saw in each location that was so unbelievably original to you?
Sure. Yeah, and I don't know it's specific. I can talk a little bit like at NFT NYC. It was pretty much like the spadely chaotic, and it was really even the venue. They had three venues that you could go back and forth to. One on 42nd, 44th, and 47th, right in Times
Hmm.
Square there, and they rented it all out. Incredibly hype, and a lot of people there were really excited. And I think that to me was, and there were speakers I saw, but he was so excited about it. It was like he discovered like electricity. He kind of described, and I think right after that he tried to sell his manuscript and got sued, which is kind of interesting. I don't know if you followed that story at all, but he was going to sell the Pulp Fiction manuscript, the one that he had notes in. He was going to sell that as a physical NFT, and then the movie studio had other ideas about that, so they had to do some
And
legal things.
you're talking about Tarantino.
Yes, yeah, yeah. And so like
Fair enough,
that,
yeah.
that was really interesting. And Buster Rhymes was there as a musician. But I think a lot of the ones, one of the ones that I thought was really interesting was, and it was a lightly attended uh, speaker, and she had a hologram, and she was talking about holograms, and she had a little plastic thing. It was not very big, and you put it on your phone, and you could essentially you could create a hologram, and I thought that was really interesting. And I think the whole hologram, and you see it in science fiction. That's where you also find great ideas. Or the science fiction people are always thinking, 50 years ahead. You can watch Star Trek and see things that we have now, right? Like still waiting for the
Hmm.
teletransporter, but I guess we'll still wait for that. But the hologram thing was really interesting to me, and she was so passionate about it, and I think that there's going to be all these applications that are going to apply to not only your phone but just like your the way you the way you interact with data was the other piece of it, right? Like, somebody else talked about it from Wax, and the idea of an NFT. Google Glass was ahead of its time, right? Like it came out and it was really cool, and then they kind of pushed it away. It just kind of went off to the side and quietly went away. And imagine like instead of in the future, you buy an NFT and you go to a certain event or a concert or a venue and you have your glasses, and because you have that NFT, it unlocks a completely different experience for you than somebody else if you're in the club or you're not, right? So I think
Hmm.
that would be really interesting too. Some people talked about that, and I think the stuff that they're doing will mainstream that. And you mentioned Sean Coinbase. I signed up in October for the NFT marketplace. I think I was 1 point a friend a couple weeks ago, and he was like 3.2 on the waiting list, right? So
Oh,
that
really?
I think that will help. That will mainstream people significantly, and they do a great job of educating people and about stuff. So yeah, I
Yes,
thought
they
that
do.
was yeah.
Hmm.
I think it's very interesting, especially the holograms and the holographic technology, because it speaks to something that ties back to our children, which is this idea of hyper realism. And for anybody that has not yet seen this beautiful collection that Michael has, Non Fungible People collection, it is beautiful in so many different ways because it, first of all, exemplifies diversity, individuality of personality. The color is great, the atmosphere is great, the feeling is real, everything is clear and beautiful. You really ought to take a look at the collection if you're listening. But I like it so much because it stops just short of that line of hyperrealism, and particularly in the world of avatars, as the technology advances and we can do this hyperrealistic with the pores and the skin and the eyelashes and
Right.
you know the hair that's colored at the roots and not on the ends. How do we help children navigate the difference between what's real and what's not real? It seems to me like
Yeah,
there
that's
becomes
that's
a real fine walking line there about you know I can see a PFP, or I can see an image or an NFT, and I know that it's been digitally rendered and it's fun and it's beautiful and it's part of a collection. But on the other hand, this hyperrealization is crossing the border in animation and in realities that it's often difficult, really difficult to know, is this happening in real life? Example is that primarily is based not in
I have not
reality,
seen it yet.
but to watch it, you would absolutely believe that you were living real life. So, how do you help navigate? How does one determine the reality of something or the veracity of it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, wow, that's pretty deep. I think the interesting thing with that is, you know, so I did a master's thesis on like back in the day, and this was before internet took over. It was about children television impact. And if you've read it, Neil Postman was a man who wrote about amusing ourselves to death and talked about the impact of television on kids. And a lot of people thought that when kids saw violence, they would be prone to violence, and they actually didn't. And there were studies that said there wasn't like when you watch somebody, in a car crash or shoot somebody, it doesn't mean you want to become violent. And they've done studies on that. Now, this was like back in the 80s, and so I'm not sure all the other research that's come out. But when kids see that, there's something about that they understand. I don't know why or how, but they kind of understand that difference between what's real and what's not. I think as parents, I think the more you discuss with the kids, that's important. Obviously, as the kids are younger, you want to shelter your children from things, and then you have that one point where like, okay, now they need to see things as they are, and maybe the stuff you protect them from, you need to expose them to, right? And I think a lot of that has to do with just kind of the conversations. As far as like the actual like the what your eye sees and things, it's really interesting because you get into things like deep fakes where people are gonna like create, it looks like you can come up with news that didn't happen or things that didn't happen. But I think the one thing that's interesting, and this is where it's even more interesting with, if you look at our the hyperrealism of new fungible people, we spend a lot of time with this. One of the things that I feel like you can really tell is eyes. Eyes are probably one of the most difficult things to fake for whatever reason, and I don't know. And that comes back to the real life. When you look at somebody, you can look them in the eye and you see things that you don't see, like the windows to the soul, right? And being able to fake that is really hard. And I mean, we and as a hyper realistic artist, we try really hard to be as close to that as possible. And I think there's something about that I don't know what the spirit or whatever that might be, that's really hard to do. And I think you can kind of see that difference a little bit. But with our collection, I think that's what's a little bit unique. We're not doing like monkeys and apes, and we're letting people kind of, and it will be really interesting. We're going to be revealing after the new year, so people are public sales the 27th, and then we have that waiting period where nobody really knows what's in store and inside that vial and what they're going to be. And we have I think it's over 25,835 different traits. So a lot of characteristics. You might have a base character. We have like thousands of different pieces, like hair, right? We can go a lot of different directions with hair, and there are 31 main different characters with all these different things. We can do facial tattoos that look real. That's going to be really interesting. And Shauna, you mentioned like how do you interact with it? We don't know yet. We really don't. And I think people will probably go to and maybe put a tattoo. I don't know what they're going to do, how they interact with that identity and how they identify with that. It'll be. But the one thing you said too is diverse. It's a really diverse. It's focused and gender neutral, and I think that's what's going to be really interesting. And listen, we partner with some of the other ones like Family Squad and World of Women. So we're very much we have a lot of really powerful women in our company that are great designers. And we feel really excited about that, bringing that in there. And I think I have older sisters and a mother, and I was a youngest of three, so I had really three moms growing up. And, they kind of hammered that into me. with the whole idea that women in society are probably underrepresented in certain areas where they shouldn't be. And I think we're slowly seeing that transform. And there's a great book called Half the Sky. I don't know if you've read that, but it talks about how in the world we waste the opportunity waste that we have for certain women that are in certain other cultures, right, are just not given the same opportunities. Or we can give those opportunities, the better we all are as a society in general, So we're excited about that.
Well, there certainly are no wallflowers in that collection, and each of the women could stand on their own. So I do really want to encourage people to go and take a look, even if you're not in the buying state. Just go take a look, because it is cutting edge technology. It is beautiful, sophisticated artwork, and they do have their own personality and their own individuality too. Richard, you wanted to ask about Meta? You had a question?
Before
Yes.
we run into Meta, I've
Yes,
still got a pin in Meta, and I am going to
Okay.
come back to
Okay.
that. Trust me. The while we're talking about the NFTs, though, there's a question that I've been kind of batting around that I'd like to run through you. Is how do you see the value proposition for long-term sustainable NFTs? Or what do you see? Sorry,
Sure.
not how. Because, I mean,
Yeah.
we've seen so many money grab NFTs, like celebrities come on and do a splash, or there's been a lot of speculation in the marketplace that the majority of us know is going to crash. What do you see as long-term sustainability in the NFT marketplace?
Yeah, I would say two things, and this is what I heard time and time again at all the conferences and people I've talked to: community and utility, and then the third one would be interoperability. So, community first is the people that you're interacting with. You're basically kind of, especially with the PFP collections, NFT in general. I mean, there's a whole bunch of different subsets. There are people that collect, and there's a lot of studies that have been done by the mindset behind collecting. Why do people collect? There's some mortality salience where people collect because they know that's going to be there longer than they'll be here, and some people do it for investment. Some people do it to give as gifts. But I think from a community standpoint, people want to become part of something, right? And I think when you look at like the Bored Ape Yacht Clubs, who've done a really good job with that, when you talk to the people, and everybody uses them as an example, and it's really funny because they didn't the Sugar Lab, they did not come up with this whole master plan. This is what they're going to do. They came out with a group of and they kind of looked at, I think my understanding was they kind of looked at hash masks when what they did, and they're like, oh, we can do that, let's do that with monkeys, right? And they did that, and they kind of let it go, and the community jumped in and ran with it, and that created these incredible bonds. And they were guys that were, in corporate America, whatever. They thought it was interesting, they thought it was funny, bucks, and then the next thing you know, they're on a Discord chat talking with somebody and find out they have all these common things together, and then they're like, hey, let's go do something Decentraland. Hey, let's do this. And before you know it, in a very short amount of time, all these people started getting together. And then you finding, there's a great meme where there's a guy dancing on the side of a hill. I don't know what it's called, and I always refer to it, but he's dancing by himself. And he looks like a maniac. He's a crazy guy, right? And then there's another guy that comes and sees him, and he starts dancing next to him. And that's the first follower. And that's the guy is the most important in the community. Somebody that validates the first guy and says, yeah, what you're doing is cool. And then you have the third and everybody else after that says, yeah, I'm with you. And once you get that critical mass, these people are like, hey, we're all doing the same thing. This is great. Now we have a community. And I think that to me is what really drives the sustainability of a collection like that. And then the second part would be the utility, where you can use these things. So it's not just a picture that sits on your phone or on your LinkedIn, but it's really kind of an identity, and you use it as that. And you can use that in games. And I think as the metaverse continues to evolve, people will want to tie that in there and say, hey, listen, this is who I am in this space. And so they use that utility. And for us, we tie that 3D utility fund to that and allow people to kind of with that. And then the last one is be interoperability. And that to me, that's utility. And it's being able to go from place to place to place. And I can buy a hoodie and I can bring it with me. I don't have to buy 5 of them in 5 different places. I can buy one, it's mine. And I think that's gonna be paradigm shifting when you have people like Roblox and Fortnite who have a closed economy. They're gonna have to make some
Mhm.
decisions on whether they allow people in or do they want to continue to have their closed economy. And we'll see. I have a sneaking suspicion that they're gonna figure some things out. So it'll be interesting.
Mhm.
See, and now we segue straight into Meta.
Oh, perfect.
Talking about closed systems and closed
Yep.
ecosystems, what do you see happening as Meta gets more involved in the space?
Yeah, it was really interesting because I don't know. I think they announced it in November, whenever they changed their name in the early part of November.
Hmm.
It was right before one of the conferences, and whenever it was brought up, there was a big, kind of a collective groan, right? Like, oh, kind of the idea that they're going to come in and ruin this for everybody. And
Hmm.
I heard a couple people talk about it. They're like, listen, guys, this is not how it is. These people are going to come in and put a ton of money into develop. They're going to help mainstream it, and I think there's a belief that they. And again, I don't know. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg's a pretty smart guy, but I don't know how they're going to. I don't know how they centralize something that is based on the idea of decentralization, and I don't know how they propose to do that. And I just don't. I don't know that it does. And it's kind of like when the internet took off, the company called Global Crossing, they laid millions and millions of miles of cable, and what they did is they drove the price of internet connection way down. They ended up folding. I don't think they exist anymore, or they not what they used to be, if they even do. And they created this path for everybody to the internet. So
Hmm.
I think it's going to be a net positive. And I think most of the people that I talk to are like, okay, great. But there's also this cautious, like, okay, let's the way that people play with data, and we had talked a little bit about this in the past, and the whole idea that big corporations could buy and sell your data. Now we're moving to a place where I own my own data, and corporations
Hmm.
will pay me to watch things instead of paying a central like a TV station to get me to watch things. They can go right to me now, and I could join something, and if they know that I'm going to, um, watch or interact with something, then my interaction is valuable to them. And I think it's interesting. I have a relative that works in the media, uh, marketing, ad agency, right? And so
Hmm.
she is in charge of buying ad space for local news stations. Um,
Hmm.
I don't watch local news. I don't know too many of my friends that do. I maybe I watch it for the weather, but I don't. And maybe that's just a symptom of me. I don't know. I get my news in a lot of different places, but the network television is changing. I don't know people like
Hmm.
it's so dispersed. Cable came in and changed that, and now we have streaming services.
Hmm.
People are not older, younger people are not watching network television unless it's a live sporting event or something. They're not tuning in. They're
Hmm.
joining in their friends with games. They're going into ecosystems like Roblox and Fortnite. They're going to be going to the meta. People are going to want to figure out how to monetize that, and one way to monetize that is getting people to sign up to use your services and paying them to to do that. So I don't know. It'll be really interesting. But
I think
I
you
think
bring up a
think
sorry, I think you bring up some very interesting points about advertising and the shift in advertising. Because what it's also going to change is who has the money to reach the most people. Because what's going to happen, as I see, is it becomes more and more difficult as companies to reach your target market as we go further down this rabbit hole. Because look, I mean, radio
right.
advertising's gone. TV advertising is starting to slowly drift down as streaming platforms and so on become more the norm. So as those advertising engagement eyeballs are disappearing for these big brands, how does that then affect someone like Coca-Cola? And these kind
Right.
of brands that you have worked with, that now the advertising of mass media through television is now disappearing because kids don't want to watch adverts. I don't want to watch adverts. If anything with an
Right.
advert comes on, boom, I'm gone like a, yeah, hot
My
balloon, gone,
son's
out of
my
there.
son's Christmas wish was to take the adverts off of his Spotify. Was willing
Right.
to give up a Christmas gift so he doesn't have to watch advertisements on Spotify.
So you see, so for
Well,
me,
it's all. No,
Sorry,
I was
Michael.
going to say it's really interesting. No, I said I was going to say I think that's really interesting because kids don't get advertised. They don't. They have. They do not want to be done like that. And I think when you mentioned Coca-Cola, it's really important for the brands to reach out and be authentic in that space. So they can't advertise. They can participate. And Adidas did a really good job with that too recently, with their kind of jump into the metaverse and they went in. They bought a Bored Ape Yacht Club, so they became part of the community. They they partnered with a few iconic people in that space. And basically, they're saying, "Hey, we're with you." And now they're allowing people to kind of interact with that brand in a different way. And the other part of it is like with these, we'll call them digital native brands that like Artifact, with their clothing. People want that because they saw them kind of evolve, and they were in early on it. They're like, "Yeah, I love these guys, and here's why." I'm partner at Ape Academy. I just bought my first hat that's coming next week. Hopefully, we'll see. But like, and I bought it because like I have an affinity for it. And the other thing I have hats for, I have favorite beers that I like, and there's one in New Belgium Brewery. Fat Tire is one of my favorite beers for the last 20 years, and I love the hat. I have a cool brand, and I identify with that, right? And so I think people. Brands are going to try to become part of these collections and these NFT things, because what you're really doing is you're building a brand now. It's not about NFTs anymore. It's about a brand. And that brand for us, like with the NFP, is about and what it stands for and what it means, what it doesn't mean. And I think who's involved. And then people want to be part of that. World of Women is a great example. Reese Witherspoon, she joined in the community. Just like Jimmy Fallon and Steph Curry and Snoop Dogg joined the Bored Ape Yacht Clubs. They're in. They want to be part of something. So it's pretty cool.
So do you see the growth of social tokens as well starting to be one of the next phases that we move into?
Yeah, I think it could be interesting. I don't know. I don't know enough, to be honest. To be fair, I don't know enough about the mechanics on that. I think that it could lead to something pretty interesting, because for the most part, again, it comes back to utility, right? Like, what are you going to get with that token? If it's just if it's currency, if it's just currency to spend on things, I don't know. But I think if it has something to do with you get access to something, then I think it might be interesting. Yeah.
So give us a moment. If we dissect things like Facebook and Meta and so on, is it worth dissecting things like what Gary Vee did with VFriends? Because I thought what he did with VFriends absolutely game changing.
Yeah, I did too, because he to me that was just a big hey, it's not about the content, it's about the community, right? I mean, he wasn't,
and the contract
he was
contract.
Yeah, exactly. He was unabashed about that. He wasn't. He knew his art wasn't wasn't great art, right? And he let people know that, and he was like, yeah, it's not about that. And he was. I'm a big guy. I think he's a lot of things.
People should not see that and think, well, that's all it takes to have a successful NFT run. Because as you know, Michael, especially after the work that you've put into non-fungible people, that could not be further from the truth. It takes, how long did you spend developing that collection, would you say?
20 years. Like, I mean, I think it's been, it's been one of those things that we didn't, what makes us a little bit unique is we've been doing this for 20 years. So for me, it's people ask, we're running this long race and they just see across the finish line and think we just started, and we haven't, right? It's all that long thing. And Gary Vee too. He's been at it for a long time, but all of a sudden you see him taking off with NFTs and you're like, wow, this guy just made it, right? Well, no, he'll tell you that he's a grinder, right? He outworks a lot of different things. So.
Well, I was just closing up on an hour. So I wonder if you would leave us, Michael, with any predictions for 2022 and what you expect to see in the world of NFT and metaverse as we move forward in the year ahead.
Sure. I think there's a couple things. One is I think you're going to find a lot of interesting things. There's going to be more movement on the Ethereum versus maybe Solana and some other things. I think I've been talking to a lot of people on Solana, and I've used both platforms, Ethereum and Solana, and some Theta and some other places. Solana is probably right now it's more user friendly with no gas fees, and I think they're going to make a big push. I also don't know. I saw Tezos was at the Art Basel, and they were doing a lot of education, kind of explaining what an NFT was. And the hard part is in this space, we all think that everybody knows what NFT is, and because it was on Saturday Night Live, the whole world knows, and they don't. And there's still a lot of people that are scratching their heads, and they go, "What do you do again? You sell digital images?"
Very
And,
true.
like they don't quite understand that concept. So I think Coinbase will be a big mover into things. I think Meta will in that as well. Right after they made that announcement, I saw that commercial about 20 times on TV with the jungle, and they're jumping around and advertising the metaverse and what it's going to be. I think you're going to see a lot of different things like we talked a little bit about education, moving into that space with metaverse learning, being able like virtual learning changing. I also think that there's going to be I think blockchain in general is going to change a lot of industries that people aren't even ready for. And I think I think central banking is in the crosshairs of that. I thought it was interesting that when rabid environmentalists, I don't think that was a mistake. That wasn't a coincidence. So I think there's speaking of environment, there's going to be a lot of push to proof of stake as well. Moving away from the proof of work, and I think that will be a big push too. So I mean, this is probably all going to happen. Like who knows timing, but there's just so much going on. I think it's exciting, but it's also exhausting at the same time. It's like I don't think we've ever seen this much information and change happen in such a short amount of time.
So fast.
And I think that's where, at the end of the day, humans and people, we're all going to need to take more breaks at the end of the day. I think that's, if I have one forecast, I'd say more vacation for everybody, but or hope, but we'll see.
Outdoor vacation, unplugged vacation.
Yes, in nature. I mean, like nature is it's so underrated, and like all the medical and mental health things. I think that's the other thing too, is I think there's going to be more of a focus on mental health. I think the COVID put a lot of that in people's right in the front, and a couple of sports superstars kind of came out and said, "Hey, I need some help," and I think that's going to be. I think we'll be better. It's really interesting. I think with all the stuff that's going on and like everything, I feel like there's a lot more hope today I don't know why, and I don't have been, but there's all this potential that we don't know. We know it's out there, but we don't even know how to harness it. And I think that's what makes me like really hopeful for 2022 and beyond. So we'll see.
Yes, at the same time though, in business it can be quite frustrating, can it?
Oh, absolutely.
Because personally, we have all this, as you said, personally we have all this hope and anticipation of wonderful things to come. But in business, when everyone's sort of operating in the shadows of everybody else, it can be very difficult to put a step forward and know definitively, yes, this is the right direction, this is the right move, this is the right partner, this is the right time, because so much of life is timing.
Yeah, and it was interesting. Like the one thing that I did notice things, and somebody else told me this, and I don't know who, but for compared to corporate America, I think space is much more collaborative than any I've ever been involved in. The whole way we're all going to make it, and that idea, that ethos, and I feel like I think it's a younger generation that's coming in and saying, listen, I don't need to win everything. I want a lot of people to win with people. And I think that's maybe where I get more hopeful. You're right, though, Sean. We don't know. Like, we're going to take some steps, and we're going to going to explore things and they're going to fail and we're going to have to readjust to do that. But I do think that people are much more open now to collaboration. And that was one thing that I learned a lot of during this whole launch too, that we wouldn't have been able to launch had we not partner with other people. And because people that had established communities reached out and helped us, we wouldn't have been able to do it by ourselves. And I think that pay it forward kind of mentality, when other collections are coming up, we're going to do the same for them. We'll help them because we can all win. And I think the old school zero sum game is kind of moving on. And I think this whole collaboration is really interesting. And I kind of took me, I was a little bit like, I wasn't too sure at the beginning. And I think like, I think there's a lot of great people out there. I still do. So feel good.
I think that's a great way to wrap it up of saying that one of the joys that we're able to do with all of what we're doing here and what we're able to broadcast out of this is to try and help that collaboration. How do we get people together? How do we start the conversations for people to realize that they can now take those ideas and make them real? And this is the time, with this much interest in this space, with this much energy in the space at the moment, this is the time to take those little crazy things that everyone's been thinking of and find someone to do it with.
Yeah. Well, I mean, listen, I want to thank you, both of you too. Like, I don't think a lot of people realize just by you talking about it and putting thought into this and getting the word out, that's huge. It's just gonna help everybody. And we really appreciate that. So thank you for being you guys too. It's been great.
It's been our pleasure, and it's an easy project to support. So again, for anyone who's tuning in late, Non-Fungible People, the launch date is going to be the 27th, or that's your actual sale date, I should say.
Public sale date. Yep.
And then after the 27th, you'll have some events coming up to support that and support the community. And I was lucky enough the other night to participate in the Twitter community on Non-Fungible People. We had a blast. It was a lot of fun. So if you like Twitter, I would encourage you to participate in those as they come up. Is there anything else, Michael, you want to add?
No, I mean, I think I thank you guys both again. And, like you said, check out there's a Discord and Twitter. And I mean, and if you're interested in, one of the things I will say about the community that I'm really proud of is we have a lot of 3D digital artists that didn't really know much about the crypto and NFT space. We had people that were on the NFT side that didn't know anything about 3D art. And we're kind of having a lot of people. It's a really welcoming and they're really good at educating and helping. So like, if you're interested in it, swing by and check it out and hop in and ask questions. And I guarantee you 4 or 5 people will help you answer the questions, or at least help you find somebody that can. So.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you, everyone. And that's us for the night then. Thank you all for joining us.
Okay, good.